Alan Quinlan, pre-season is underway for you?
Pre-season is underway for sure. I'm sorry.
When you haven't seen you running that fast in a long time.
Oh no. I'm all achy, Stephen, everywhere. Aches and pains.
So that Brian O'Driscoll and Malcolm O'Kelly video, as you saw there, coming your way over the next couple of days. The 1999 Rugby World Cup is going to be the topic of discussion. Early days for you, Alan. When do you think about 99, I presume?
Yeah, I got called into the squad late in 99 and made my debut against Romania. So I remember got called in on a Wednesday, came off the bench against Romania on the Friday night in the old Lansdowne Road. And the initiation of your first cap didn't happen for me because we were going to play Argentina on a Tuesday night in Lons, that famous disastrous result. So I was in on Wednesday and I was back in my car the following Wednesday going back home after probably one of the worst losses in kind of recent times. Anyway, it was just a devastating loss that against Argentina in Lons. But from a selfish point of view, I was driving home. I was an international now. You know, I played 20 minutes against Romania, so I was happy, and so I was disappointed initially not to be in that World Cup squad in '99. But lucky I got called in anyway. And I had nothing to do with the loss against Argentina.
When you say that you missed out on the initiation of that first cap, do you mean that in a literal sense? Was there initiation?
Yeah, well, look,
that
yeah,
time?
Always. I think it's still probably the case. Depending, not as much where everyone would get you a drink, and you'd probably end up being a bit of worse for wear.
Did you have to do one?
Night. No, I think I slipped through it because I think people forgot about it after that. I started against Italy the following. It was 2 years before I played again for Ireland, and I started in Italy. And I remember Emmett Byrne had made his first cap there, and you have to be a bit sensible with it too. Everyone comes up and gets you a drink, and you have to have a drink, so it could be a shot, a pint, and you have to kind of down it, and that was the tradition. And I remember poor Emmett Byrne. We had to get him a bucket after the dinner in Rome, just to kind of get some of the alcohol back out of the system. But that was funny. I just think back of some of those memories, and they were good ones. But I kind of slipped through the net because we went from Romania on a Friday night to we were travelling to France the next day to be ready for Argentina. So it was.
They had bigger fish to fry rather than giving you a cocktail, basically.
Yeah, I think there was no drinking after the game. We went back to the old Berkeley, and there was some food and a few family members there, and there was probably a couple of bottles of beer floating around, but that was it.
We want to talk about England in the context of this year's World Cup. Obviously, the latest squad announcement yesterday, Danny Cipriani, the biggest casualty.
Yeah, obviously Eddie Jones has owned Farrell, and he has George Ford. He's saying Elliot Daly, or Henry Slade, his backup fly half, and it's strange because he brought him into the squad. He didn't name him initially, then he brought him into the squad, and now he's out of the squad. So you think it's probably there's 38 players gone to Treviso for a 12-day camp, and I'm not sure what he's trying to do with him really.
So it looked like Eddie Jones was almost nurturing the possibility, or the very real possibility, of Danny Cipriani figuring in this year's World Cup.
I think he's trying to look at him and keep him involved and keep him, but he's kind of on the outside because Pierre Francis is there as well as another possibility as a fly half, and I'm not sure he's a fan of his. He had him in South Africa 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago this summer? Yeah. When last year he was involved in South Africa, and they lost 2 tests, 1-1, and he's a very talented player. Danny Cipriani, probably not the most physical defensively, but he's had a super year in the Premiership and got Player of the Year there again. So it's probably the one that's making the headlines. He's called Mike Brown back into his squad, but it's an incredibly powerful group of players that have serious potential, and it just goes to show. Look, I think Owen Farrell is probably, he finished the season being the best fly half in the world, I think. Obviously, Johnny Sexton had an incredible year in 2018, was World Player of the Year, and deservedly so. Didn't have a great Six Nations, but I think Farrell was, even finishing with Saracens, was just superb. Both of those guys played together in the Lions in 2017, New Zealand. That's how close they are, and they're very on their day. Sexton is as good as him, if not better sometimes, but I think Farrell is just an incredible player as well, and he's a real talisman. He's a real physical presence for England, and Cipriani is probably just nowhere near the same amount of physicality, but he may feature still. I think Eddie Jones has said he's gone back to work on strength and conditioning, like some of the other players who've not been named in their 38-man squad.
When we look at England, it's a team that's kind of missed our radar a small bit when it comes to World Cup preview, because if they top their pool and we top our pool, we can't meet until the final. Basically, we're on opposite sides of the draw that way. But looking at them, they do have a chance in this thing. I mean, we often look at England, we look at the drawbacks they have going into recent World Cups, but then you look at their head coach and you look at Eddie Jones, and for all the failings of Eddie Jones that we might have liked to point it out over the last couple of years, this is a fella who stepped up at the World Cup.
Yeah, and what he did with Japan and at the last World Cup was incredible. He's had success with Saracens before, with Brumbies, with Australia, and he has a knack of getting teams to perform and getting the best out of him. He's pretty ruthless in his approach, and I think by his own admission he probably made mistakes in the last 2 years with England. Those talks of overtraining, too much physicality, players being worn out. Didn't take into account the length of the season in the Premiership over there, the amount of games guys had played. When Ireland won the Triple Crown, or the Grand Slam in Twickenham in 2018, I think a lot of players, a lot of stuff was coming out that they probably had their most physical week, their physical week of training that week of the English game, or the Irish game, and that was an issue. But I think he's a very astute, and he's a lot of talent at his disposal there, and I think they're a serious proposition for the World Cup. I think they will top their group, and I think it'll be Australia or Wales that'll top the other group, and they'll play either Australia or Wales in the quarterfinals, and I think they'll be in, they'll go into a semi-final then, and they're a serious proposition to win this World Cup, I think.
They're a real contender, you think?
Yeah, I think they are real contenders. When you look at the team they have, Mako Vunipola, Jamie George, Sinclair, it'll probably be Itoje, Cruz, Wilson, Billy Vunipola, Tom Curry, what an outstanding number 7. He's just matured, the physicality, Ben Youngs, Farrell, Tuolangi, Slade, Johnny May, Nowell, Elliot Daly fullback, with lots of kind of talent. Watson is back, Anthony Watson, Jamie Joseph is back, Jonathan Joseph, sorry. They have a lot of talented outside backs who can really hurt teams, I think, and Launchbury's backup second row, Courtney Laws.
It's unbelievable.
Brad Shields.
Yeah, it's some setup that they have, and like when you look at that depth as well, it's frightening if you come up against them.
Yeah, and Kokanasinga, the winger.
Yeah,
he's a monster. Incredibly big, 6'4", unbelievably fast. He's someone who could start for England as well and do untold damage at the World Cup.
Is this different though from Eddie Jones' perspective in terms of having a little bit of friction with the organisation that he's working for? Like, I don't know too much about how he was actually viewed in Japan, but it seemed that things were a little bit better. Like, looking at his quotes last month, he was speaking in the Lifetimes pod, and he said, "I always think that England have been underperforming. If you have financial security and depth of players, you should be one of the top 3 countries in the world most of the time, and that has not been the case. There are wonderful players here and a wonderful opportunity, but it's always being held back by the traditions of the game here." That's only a month ago, those quotes. Right, going into pre-season, he's trying to send a message.
Yeah, he is, and he's the type of fellow who's he's not part of the PC brigade, that's why he's very entertaining, and he says stuff out like that. And you probably know yourself, Stephen, in any sport, people, there's a lot of predictable quotes from managers and stuff, and Jones just says stuff, and he's great for the media, isn't he? And but
it mustn't be great, like going into your pre-season.
No, I'd say he doesn't care. He doesn't really care. I think if he delivers at a World Cup for England, that's it. He could walk away. His contract is, I think, it's for a year or 2 after. But there's all sorts of talk that they don't deliver, he'll be replaced after the World Cup. So I think he's very entertaining. The persona of Eddie Jones is that he's this weasel and that he's this horrible person, and it's easy sometimes to think like that, the way kind of he speaks and talks and kind of fires at people.
Have you met him many times?
Met him a couple of times, yeah. Very nice fella and good fun, and I think he's very giving of himself and of his time in England for charities, for rugby clubs, gives a lot back, and so yeah, the persona of the player and the coach is always different than the person. Most of the time it's different. When they're in that competitive environment, they can be narky, and he's kind of that fiery spirit about him. And you have to remember, he started off really, really well with England, going back down to Australia, winning a series down there, and people were talking about England. They went like that straight away, and then dropped a good bit. Had a really disappointing year, the year Ireland 2018 in the Six Nations. But when you look at the players, it's a reminder, and the side of the group they're on, they will top the group, and I think they'll get right there.
You did say, though, he made mistakes, Alan. And is it possible, because Schmidt, Gatlin, they've both been here at a World Cup, they know how to manage a team through a World Cup, is it possible Eddie Jones could make mistakes again because it's his first World Cup with England, and you know they've got Argentina and France? Is there any possibility both
I think
Argentina
he's
and France
made mistakes.
could they scupper their chance of getting that top spot?
Obviously he's been there with Australia before, and you know lost that final in 03, and
Japan.
He's been there with Japan.
Involved with South Africa as well?
He was involved with South Africa as well before. I'm not sure of the World Cup, but I think he'll have learned from those, and probably learned from the pressure he's talking about, the financial strength of England, the quality of players, and they are a might. They've always been that way. They've always had incredible depth, huge amount of players to pick from, and there's a certain amount of pressure there, and I think he has made mistakes, maybe some of his man management, maybe some of his outspoken quotes, overtraining the players, pushing them hard. It's getting the balance right. And I think if England go to a World Cup in good physical shape, and that's always the key, and I've said this many times from my experiences, you know, you can train the house down, but you can be wrecked when it comes to the World Cup, and that's where the fitness people have to get it right, and they have to stamp their authority and be strong, and get them in the best shape. You can be in brilliant shape, but you don't want to be worn out come a World Cup. So I think he'll have learned from maybe his own individual management of players and his own style, and he's that kind of hard, intense style.
And Argentina, France can either.
Yeah, of course. Argentina showed it the weekend when they played New Zealand. They should have won that game. I think I said this 4 years ago. I said, come the next World Cup, they're going to be a real threat. Some people say it's a bit unfair that Jaguares are practically the Argentinian team, and they play so regularly together in Super Rugby that they will have maybe an unfair advantage come the World Cup. They're going to be incredibly hard to beat, and who knows what's going to happen with France. We've always, we always say that, but I just think England are a real threat at this World Cup, and possibly going into a final, I think.
Sure, we'll knock them out in the semi-final, and we'll put pay to that, Alan.
Yeah, well, it'd be a nice one, wouldn't it? But we certainly owe them one after last year coming to Dublin. But very strong squad.
Absolutely, good stuff, Alan. We'll chat to you soon.